Good evening, everyone. Warm welcome to our very first Audience With event with our very special guest speakers, Professor Barbara Wilson and QEF Head of Therapies, Carr. I'm really delighted to see that so many of you have been able to join us this evening. I just have a handful of housekeeping points to run through with you before we can begin. Please note that all attendees will be muted throughout to allow for the best live experience. We recommend enjoying the event in speaker view, which you can do by clicking in the top right corner of your screen and selecting that option. Please note the event will be recorded, so if you missed anything at any time, we'll be able to share it with you next week. Also, if you do happen to have any internet connection issues, don't worry, you'll be able to rejoin at any time just by using the same original link that we sent you earlier and yesterday. We'll be monitoring the lobby throughout, so hopefully you wouldn't miss too much of the events. At any point, if you have a question for one of our speakers, we'd love you to submit it, and you can do so using the chat function at the bottom of your screen. We'll do our best to get through as many as we can in our Q&A session at the end. I really hope you enjoy the event this evening. So it's my great pleasure to be able to hand over to QEF CEO, Karen Deacon. Thank you, Karen.
Thank you. Good evening, everybody, and welcome to our first in a series of events that we're really excited about, partly to make you aware of what QEF does, but what it also can do in the future. QEF has a long history, 85 years in its making as a charity, and we're really excited now that the future is looking very different to perhaps how it could have done. But what we didn't need this year, of course, like everybody else on this call, was a pandemic, and it affected us quite significantly at the beginning. But we've come out with some new ideas and new ways of working. I want to tell you a little bit about QEF and what we do, because I suspect some people on the call aren't aware of the whole offer that QEF can make. We're currently supporting over 10,000 people a year through our group, and we have a few parts to our group, and I'm just going to explain what they are now. Our direct services, and we're going to hear a lot about those tonight, are our Care and Rehabilitation Centre, which is brand new, opened on the 7th of July. That sounds like a very quick statement to say that, but actually in the middle of a pandemic, virtual registration, a sale that nearly didn't go through, and moving with groups of clients that were coming straight out of hospital was no easy feat, and I absolutely take my hat off to the amazing team that I work with in the CRC that made that happen. It was absolutely phenomenal. But we had to do it because we had to be part of the solution to the community, particularly during this COVID crisis. We then had Dorring Court, and Dorring Court, some of you may know that we had planned to reduce the number of beds in Dorring Court. But actually, the need for the clients in the CRC, the new Care and Rehabilitation Centre, has increased so much, we've decided to keep, at this time, Dorring Court open. That's put an additional facility in for people who are coming out of hospital, and we're trying to take people out of hospital very, very quickly, some as quick as 3 days after their initial stroke. So it really is a much more rapid turnover than we've ever been used to, and I think that's had to challenge our thinking about how we've managed admissions and discharges as well. We also had an acquisition in February this year, and that's the Grange, and that's also direct services, and that's for learning disability services based in Kent. So we have 48 beds in the CRC, 42 beds currently in the Dorring Court, and 25 beds in the Grange, over 3 sites, and they're around the Cranbrook area in Kent. We have a mobility service, and we're very proud of our mobility service. Over 4,000 people a year use our mobility service. And that enables people to either travel, access travel when they can, of course. Aviation particularly has been a problem for people with disabilities for many, many years, but not least this year. But also how to keep driving, or driving if you need a vehicle adapted. We then have a medical engineering unit, and that's really dealing with the children of our group at the moment, and providing them Bugsies, which I'm sure you'll have seen on our website, and if not, you really should. They are really life-changing for young children who aren't able to access that equipment through the NHS under 5. It's their first experience of mobility. We're also very busy with Santa's elves this moment with our adapted toys, and believe you me, Meru looks just like Santa's cave at the moment. It's absolutely flooded with adapted toys, and we're getting those all out ready for children for Christmas so they can play with their siblings as well as in their friends group too. We have our holiday home and the VASD service, and that's a service that we provide equipment to those in Surrey, and that's been something that's been quite hard for us to manage, particularly during the COVID lockdown. And then we have 19 retail shops, and they have had a really tough time over the last year. We locked them down, obviously, when we had to. We opened them up, just about finished opening the last one when we had to go back into lockdown. So we have now opened our shops, as luckily they're all currently within a tier 2 and 1 area. But I think we all have to say we're just living each day as it comes at the moment. We've had to spend quite a significant sum to make sure everything is COVID secure. Our strategy has always been one at QEF of caring and creating solutions for people to, of all ages, regardless of their disability, enabling them to live their lives to the full. I think in the future, we'd like much more to close the gap in disability, so that they can choose how they live, who they live with, and live to fulfill their ambitions. And that would be something that would be quite special, I think, for people to give back. So we had the new CRC on the 7th of July. During that time, we had over 100 people furloughed from our services, and that clearly gave a lot of pressure to the team around. We have been supporting more and more people during this time, and that in itself might feel like a bit of a conflict. It certainly did for us when we were trying to manage services quickly for discharge and accessibly, whilst trying to keep everything safe. And to date, we use these words very cautiously every day. To date, we have managed COVID extremely well at QEF, and that includes all of our residential services. Our charity shops, as I say, are now back open, and the Grange is thriving. They've created their own little bubbles of not being able to go out to cafes. They've created their own cafe. We've built one in the garden, and their events program has just changed to being very different events, but they're fully engaged all the time, so it's really exciting. I'd really now like to hand over to one of our first speakers, but personally, thank you so much for joining us tonight. Even just taking part and knowing what we can do and what we can do to assist the whole system approach towards acquired brain injury is really important for us to pass that message on. So thank you so much. Thank you particularly to the Edward Guinness Fund. If we didn't have access to the Edward Guinness appeal, we wouldn't have been opening on the 7th of July. And we need ongoing support from that, but we're really grateful that I think Edward is here on this call, and we're really, really thankful for his support. Moving on then, I'd like to now introduce you to Professor Barbara Wilson, Barbara Wilson, and she's a neuropsychologist and has been for 43 years. I asked what she'd like me to do as an introduction, and she said that pretty much sums it up. So I am, with no further ado, going to hand you over, and I'll say it properly this time, to Barbara Wilson. Thank you, Barbara.
Okay. Thank you very much. Can everybody hear me okay? Is that all right, Jen? So we go to share screen and do, hold on, PowerPoints. Just one moment. Was up there just now. Okay. So I'm going to be talking about neuropsychology and acquired brain injury. Let's go to big screen. So neuropsychology, it's the study of the relationship between brain and behavior, or to put it another way, we could say it's how the brain affects behavior, emotion, and cognition. Now, neuropsychologists We assess people, neuropsychological tests, for example. We offer treatment, particularly for cognitive and emotional problems and behaviour problems. We work with families. We engage in research. We advise organisations such as Headway, for example, or the Stroke Association. And so these are the kinds of things that we do as neuropsychologists. Now, modern brain injury rehabilitation, as we understand it today, really began in World War I. I mean, we could trace the history back to ancient Egypt, but modern brain injury rehab really began in World War I. And this is the first known photograph of soldiers, brain-injured soldiers, receiving rehabilitation.
Professor Wilson?
Yes?
Please accept my apologies for interrupting you, but I'm afraid we can't see your photo and your slides at the moment. Are you able to share your screen, please? Or I'll be able to do so for you.
Let's go back to this.
So sorry.
It's all right.
Perfect, that's brilliant. Thank you so much.
Can you see it now?
Yes, we can.
Okay. Do you want me to go back?
No, don't worry, that's fine. Please continue. Thank you so much.
So we said what this neuropsychology is and the kinds of things we do. And modern brain injury rehab began in World War I, and this is the earliest known photograph of soldiers receiving brain injury. This is actually an American photograph, although most of the work was done in Germany in World War I. But this is a photograph of soldiers receiving occupational therapy. So any OTs watching, this is especially for you. And the man responsible at that time was Kurt Goldstein, very important person in brain injury rehab. He was a German neurologist and a psychiatrist who was a pioneer in modern neuropsychology. And he treated soldiers acutely at the front. He transferred them to Frankfurt to a milieu therapeutic department, and all the holistic programs, the brain injury holistic programs today, can actually trace themselves back to Goldstein. Evaluations were performed by psychologists, so he was ahead of his time. He had a school and a workshop available. So that's how it started. But today, well, it was true then too, of course, but the problems we are expected to deal with by survivors of brain injury, they certainly have motor problems, and they're the most likely to be understood and the most likely to be treated, particularly by a physiotherapist, but sometimes by neuropsychologists as well. They may have sensory problems, particularly with vision and touch, less so with hearing, but that sometimes occurs. Cognitive problems, which neuropsychologists are particularly interested in, behavioural problems, social problems, emotional problems to do with mood and so forth, problems with pain, problems with fatigue, and so on. So these are the kinds of problems that people like me would be working with jointly with the survivors of brain injury. So the kinds of cognitive problems that we deal with: memory, attention, communication problems. They're most likely to be seen by a speech and language therapist, but we sometimes get involved too. Problems with planning and organisation, the executive deficits, reasoning problems, perceptual problems, spatial awareness difficulties, and so on. The emotional and psychosocial problems that these survivors may face are with anxiety, depression, anger, fear, distress, grief, poor self-esteem, lack of confidence, and so forth. And the behaviour problems we may see are temper outbursts, shouting, swearing, physical aggression, verbal aggression, disinhibition, poor self-control, refusal to cooperate. These are the kinds of behaviour problems we might see. And in everyday life, it's not the physical problems that are the most handicapping. The cognitive, emotional, and behaviour problems are often more handicapping than the physical, the motor and sensory problems. This is quite an old quote, but it captures it, I think, by Carr et al. They said, cognitive and behavioural changes, difficulties maintaining personal relationships and coping with school and work are reported by survivors as more disabling than any residual physical deficits. So rehab, the kind of rehab I do, people like me, we target real life problems. So as far as possible, we need to address the real life difficulties experienced by people with brain injuries. Unless you're asking a particular question that you have to answer experimentally, for example. So if the question cannot be answered in this way, but the results you get should be applicable to real life problems. So good clinical practice, cognition should not be divorced from emotion, motivation, and other non-cognitive functions, because how we feel affects how we think, how we remember, how we solve problems, how we behave. We need to focus on real life problems. We need a broader theoretical base, or if you prefer, several theoretical bases. And this is good practice from the Oliver Zangwill Centre, which I founded in 1996. All of these are derived from theory, but this is, if you do these things, you're doing good clinical practice. So provide a therapeutic milieu where people feel safe. The goals of rehab should be meaningful and functionally relevant. We ensure shared understanding. That's not only understanding between staff and patients, but between staff and patients, so between everybody. Apply psychological interventions, particularly for the mood issues, for example. Manage cognitive impairments through compensatory strategies and retraining skills, and work closely with families and carers. So these we feel are the core concepts of good rehab. Now I'm going to tell you a bit about myself and how I got started in psychology. I was a mother with 3 young children, and I wanted to do an evening class. So my husband was doing a further education in Birmingham at that time. We'd lived in Birmingham for 1 year. So I phoned Bourneville Tech in Birmingham and said, is there such a thing as A-level psychology? She said, it's funny you should ask that. We're starting the first pilot study up this week. It's 2 evenings a week. Do come along. So I did. And I got very interested in the subject. And then we moved back to Reading. My husband was working. And I did my first degree at Reading University, my undergraduate degree. I wanted to go on to clinical training, and you have to have experience, clinical experience, before you're accepted onto a clinical training course. So I managed to do it while I was studying for my degree. I did 2 nights a week at a local hospital, Borough Court Hospital, which was then called a mental handicap hospital. We've changed the terminology now. And that enabled me to get my clinical training at the Institute of Psychiatry in London. After qualifying, I wanted a job in neuropsychology, but there were none available. So I went to Hilda Lewis House at Bethlehem Royal Hospital in Croydon in London. And this was for children with severe developmental learning difficulties. And I worked with 3 great psychologists, Janet Carr, who unfortunately died earlier this year, Glynis Murphy, and Pat Howlin. And I was teaching neuropsychology, so I was working clinically 3 days a week and teaching neuropsychology 2 days a week at the Institute of Psychiatry. And after 2 years, I was doing 6 hours a day commuting with 3 school-age kids at that time, so it's quite difficult. Good supportive husband, I might say. Anyway, after 2 years there, I went to Rivermead Rehabilitation Centre in Oxford. And after my first day, I knew I would spend the rest of my career in brain injury rehab, and I have. So I felt I'd found my place. So I was at Rivermead from 1979 to 1985. And I came to neuropsychological rehabilitation from the field of learning disability, then called mental handicap in the UK, and mental retardation in the USA. And while I was at Hilda Lewis House with these three wonderful psychologists, we were taught that if these children with severe learning difficulties couldn't learn, it was up to us as psychologists or therapists or teachers or medical people, whatever, to find a way to help them learn. It was our responsibility. And then I moved to neuropsychology, and it was quite different at that time. But I was told in my training, no patient is untestable or untreatable. If you say this patient's untestable, it tells you more about the psychologist than it tells you about the patient. So you should never, ever say that. So I moved to Rivermead, and neuropsychologists at that time, not at Rivermead itself, but at other places, they typically said something like, well, this man doesn't learn because he's got damage to the hippocampus, or this woman doesn't learn because she's got frontal lobe damage. And it wasn't the responsibility of the neuropsychologist to find a solution, a way around this. And I was a bit shocked at that. I was uncomfortable with that point of view. So that's why I've always been a bit, well, most people are like me now, but at that time I was unusual. And the team at Rivermead, the occupational therapists, the physiotherapists, the speech and language therapists, the social workers, they were very experienced in rehab, brain injury rehab. And I wasn't, although I had worked with these children with severe learning difficulties who also had brain damage. But I wasn't experienced with this adult brain injury rehab, but I could apply my clinical psychology training to solving health-related problems. And I felt my apprenticeship was at Rivermead Rehabilitation Centre. So I learned on the job. I was concerned with the attitude of some of the neuropsychologists, as I said. They had, as well as this, you know, it's not our responsibility, but they also had little understanding of the wider aspects. They didn't know about anxiety management, about family therapy, about behavioural approaches to learning problems. And they also talked about patients as if they were impairments, and this still happens today. And it happens on the BBC and other media, and it makes me very cross. So they say the amnesics, or the dysphasics, or the elderly, or the head injured. You shouldn't ever say that. These are people. You say people with amnesia, or people with brain injuries, or people who've survived a head injury, or whatever. And any neurologically impaired patients, they're people first, and they have needs and hopes and desires. I know I'm talking to the converted here at QEF, but in other aspects you're not. And the BBC needs to learn a few lessons, I think. Anyway, I left Rivermead in '85. I went to Charing Cross Hospital in London, where I was very unhappy. I went to Southampton University Medical School, which I liked. But I was then tempted away by a job in Cambridge with the Medical Research Council, which was then called the Applied Psychology Unit. It's now the Unit for Cognition and Brain Sciences in Cambridge. And while there, I founded the Oliver Zangwill Centre in 1996 in Ely. And I split my time then between half the week at the MRC in Cambridge and half in Ely. There was a compulsory retirement age from the MRC, but I still attached to the Oliver Zangwill Centre. And I spent 11 years doing 1 day a week at the Raphael Medical Centre in Kent. That's where I did a lot of work with people with disorders of consciousness, for example. And more recently, I've got an honorary contract with St George's Hospital in London, where I'm doing COVID-19 research, and also I'm making a film about goal planning. But to go back a bit to the Oliver Zangwill Centre, I did a sabbatical with George Brigatano in 1993. He's a big rehab person in Phoenix, Arizona. So there's George Brigatano and me while I was on sabbatical. And on my return, I met Tony Jewell from the NHS. So I came back to the UK. I didn't want to go and work in America. I'm a European. But I liked some of the rehab principles they were doing out in Phoenix, Arizona. So I came back, met Tony Jewell from the NHS, and I discussed my desire to set up a rehabilitation centre like the one in Phoenix. And I said I wanted to put into practice the best principles of rehab. So partnership between patients, families and staff, setting meaningful goals and so forth. And Tony Jewell said to me, put in a business plan. And I thought, well, that won't work, but I better do it anyway. Well, it did work. And a series of meetings followed, and it took 3 years after many meetings and plans. But 3 years later, I got an agreement from the Health Authority, was then called Lifespan, and the Chief Executive Officer was Richard Taylor, and he phoned me at home one night and said, we've got the green light, go ahead. Now, during this 3-year process, I attracted allies and enemies en route. That's a whole different story, but I won't go into that now. But we got the green light and I had to choose a name. So I wanted to call it after somebody who'd influenced rehabilitation, somebody who was British, because it's a British centre, somebody who's dead, so I didn't offend anybody, and somebody with a nice sounding name. And I chose Oliver Zangwill, who's there. I've just published a paper about the history of Oliver Zangwill in the Psychologist, if any psychologists are watching. That's the January 2021 issue. But we opened out the Oliver Zangwill Centre in 1996. And I think that shows that clinical psychologists can influence the National Health Service and healthcare of patients. It doesn't have to be done by doctors or medics or administrative people. Clinical psychologists, neuropsychologists can do this too. In 2007, the Barbara Wilson Center in Quito, Ecuador opened. This by Guido and Martha, who are the 2 people who opened this center and wanted to call it after me. And currently, well, up until lockdown, until the pandemic, I was doing 1 day a week at the Oliver Zangwill Center. And I still am in touch with them by Zoom meetings and see the occasional patient remotely. But I've mostly now, I have this honorary contract at St George's Hospital in London, where I'm doing COVID-19 work. And I'm also doing the history of goal setting in brain injury rehabilitation. I'm currently working on both of those at the moment. I'm also on the committee of the World Health Organization. There's a committee on brain injury rehab. So I'm on that committee. I do many webinars around the world. I edit a journal called Neuropsychological Rehabilitation, which started in 1991. And I do something on that journal every single day of the year, mostly delegating. I still write a lot. I've published 31 books and number 32 is coming out in March 2021. And just to briefly touch on the neuropsychological consequences of COVID-19, we know a considerable amount about the medical aspects of this new coronavirus, SARS-2, and the illness it causes, COVID-19, but less, I think, is known about the neuropsychological aspects. We know that people who've been seriously ill with COVID-19 can have a stroke or encephalitis or hypoxic brain damage. And in addition to the acknowledged difficulties with fatigue and deconditioning, people who've been severely ill in particular may have cognitive, emotional and behavioral problems that require referral to neuropsychology and or neuropsychiatric services. And at the moment, there are 39 patients who've been referred to neuropsychology at St George's, ranging in age from 32 to 84. Men outnumbered women by 3 to 1. Far more ethnic minority patients than seen in the general population served by St George's Hospital. And the majority of patients have been referred for assessment of cognitive and mood problems, with a smaller number referred for other reasons. And the cognitive problems we've seen most are memory, executive functions, and slow information processing. Just over 12% have developed a stroke as a result of COVID-19. Many have had underlying health problems, either a previous stroke or diabetes, HIV, sickle cell disease, and so forth. And in addition to the neuropsychological problems identified, about 12% of survivors require dialysis for kidney failure, I think at the time that shocked me. I wasn't expecting to see that. And a similar number were left with cardiac difficulties that I was expecting. I just wasn't expecting the dialysis, but I'm less surprised by that now. And that's all I wanted to say for this talk. So thank you very much for your attention. And these are some of my recent books. So thank you very much.
Thank you so much. We're going to pass the screen back to me. Thank you so much, Barbara, for that. That was really, really interesting. And I've made some notes which I'll sum up at the end after we've heard from Carol. Just before we hear from Carol, I'd just like to run a very short introductory video, which is just going to show you the new unit and now what it looks like. We did actually take these pictures, obviously prior to putting clients in, because we've restricted who's been in the service ever since we've opened. So these pictures were taken before it's been sort of personalised and put before some of the kit came over from Banstead when we moved. I'm just going to run that video now. Did you hear that?
Professor Barbara, would you be able to stop screen sharing? Brilliant, thank you. Thank you, Jen.
Thank you for that. I think some of the therapists on this call just might be slightly envious of some of those facilities. So hopefully at some point we will get the chance to show you a little bit more in person, but till then, this is the most interactive we can do at this stage. I'm now going to hand over to Carol Carr. Carol has worked with QEF for 18 years and is currently our head of therapies, and we're extremely fortunate that we have her on board, and we're very proud that she's our head of therapies. So Carol, I'm going to hand over to you to discuss actually what our service can do.
Thank you, Karen, and thank you, Barbara. And good evening, everybody. Thank you for coming to join us this evening. I have had the privilege to work with QEF for the past 18 years, initially as head of physiotherapy at the Brain Injury Centre in Banstead, and now as head of therapies and the new Care and Rehabilitation Centre, or CRC as we call it, in Leatherhead. I currently support 24 staff within the therapy team. This includes therapy support workers, physiotherapists, clinical psychologists, speech and language and occupational therapists who also lead our activities within CRC. We finally managed to move, as Karen said, on the 7th of July. And to move in one day was a feat in itself. But yeah, just add in a little pandemic and certainly it brought a few more challenges. The whole team came together to give the clients the best experience possible. And it was a lovely all hands on deck feel. The first client came through the door on that day, got a standing ovation. And he was so proud as he was determined to walk through the door following his incomplete spinal injury in 2019. As you can imagine, we moved in with a bunch of clients and had to hit the ground running. We even had an admission on the first day. Not quite sure why that happened. So I've just got a message to say that somebody can't see, so we need to get that sorted. So we're still settling it a little bit and finding out how we can make the use of all this space that we have. We're excited now to be able to expand our service and reach and support more people to improve their quality of life. We currently support people in the London area and throughout the South East, and in the past had a long-term client with us all the way from Jersey. As you would have seen from the video, CRC is a beautiful building with a ton of space and glorious views into the Surrey countryside. We will be developing our grounds, and we're already discussing as to where we can locate an area that the gardening group can use. So it's exciting. We have 48 bedrooms, which the clients report feel like a hotel, which is lovely. They all have hoist provision and ensuite, which has made a huge difference to our being able to support them during their 14-day isolation when they're first admitted. 16 of our rooms can be used as independent flats. They can be set up with kitchen equipment that can kind of give a little bit of understanding as to what they're going to need to do when they go home. Clients can be supported to use the accessible laundry facilities that we have, and also access our adapted vehicles and the bus service to access local towns as part of their therapy, obviously post-pandemic. There is a large therapy gym with 2 H-frame hoists, which allowed for increased flexibility of use, and we have various treatment rooms available. There are also client lounges and large areas within CRC, as you can see from this photo, which are multifunctional to allow for groups such as seated dance, sing-along music session, and art classes. It's just coming in now, I think. So as you can see, we've got some beautiful views. And it's a lovely big open space that we can get together as groups, which is lovely. Our focus is still neurological rehabilitation following stroke, acquired brain injury, incomplete spinal injury, and conditions such as Guillain-Barré syndrome. We are looking into supporting people with long COVID, and we're also keen to explore how we can help people with functional neurological disorder, or FND, and we're looking at that perhaps for the middle of next year. I'm proud to lead a highly experienced and dedicated therapy staff, many of whom have worked with me within QEF for 8 to 10 years. It's exciting to be able to bring the whole staff team, build the whole staff team within CRC, and it feels like we are adding to an already established and friendly family group. I'm just going to share with you some of our lovely team in full PPE, which is at the front of our building. This is just to the right of our reception area. So you can see us all looking our best in aprons and visors and our lovely masks. As I mentioned, the pandemic has given us some challenges over the year, as it has with everybody. We're now supporting our clients to FaceTime their families, to cope with chatting with them through a window, or with distance visits with them wearing a mask. It has made us all realise the importance of physical contact and facial expression to show connection and demonstrate empathy. We are making more use of gestures, positive inflection in our voices, and making sure that our smile reaches our eyes so that actually they can connect with us. We're using full face visors and for clients that have hearing difficulties or have cognitive impairment, because again, that will lead to more connection with them. Pre-COVID, we were used to building up a rapport with the clients together with their families, so we could support them through the rehabilitation journey all the way to discharge. Due to the lack of access for families, the adjustment to their new situation and understanding what support their loved one might need on discharge is more challenging. We now FaceTime family members during their therapy sessions and create videos to demonstrate how they might transfer or the support they might need to walk. The OTs have been doing virtual access visits, and when needed, we carry out joint discharge home visits. So we will take the client home, we will then hand over to the early supported discharge teams and the enablement teams, as well as the family. That has been invaluable and it's been really appreciated. The other effect of COVID has been that families are doing their best to enable their husband or wife, father or mother to stay in the family home, knowing that if they go into a nursing home, that visiting and physical contact will be restricted. Difficult times indeed. Obviously, we're hoping now we have the new tests, that won't be such a problem. I have been impressed with the flexibility and adaptability of the CRC team. As with everyone during this time, we have needed to respond on a near daily basis to the new rules and restrictions that COVID has brought. That has increased the need for communication and teamwork to support each other with the constant adjustment and adaptation of the way we work. One of the positive and long-standing changes has been development of the tip cards. I think Jen's going to share a photo with you now. The therapy team, led by the psychology staff, have developed a client-focused information pack, which will be bespoke to their needs. It has been put together to support the client and their families to understand the changes in the way they think, such as this one, which is a fact sheet on cognition, the way they move, communicate, or function. So it will cover the whole aspect that somebody might need to know about their change in their circumstance. We are planning to share this further early next year in a webisode, and we will let you know how you can join for this. Thank you all for your time this evening. We really appreciate you joining us. I'd now like to introduce you to Richard, who was a client with us recently. Thank you.
What happened was I was sitting down here quite late one evening and I was going fishing the next day, and I thought I'd go upstairs and get my stuff prepared so that I haven't got to rush about in the morning and do it. So I went upstairs, and vaguely I remember getting to the top of the stairs and I'd forgotten something. I went to go back downstairs, and that's all I remember. The next thing I woke up in hospital, and I slipped on the carpet. As I span round to come back down the stairs, I could see where I slipped on the carpet and come crashing head first down them stairs, hitting my head in places and fracturing my skull. By all accounts, I was bleeding in 2 places on my brain. I'd busted all my ribs, so that every time I breathed, my broken ribs were cutting into my lungs. And I'd also developed pneumonia. So that's the state I was in. And then the doctor was saying to Melanie and George's, your dad's got 4 life-threatening incidents going on at this very moment, and it's not looking good. I was in St George's for 2 weeks, 2 to 3 weeks. From there, they took me back to East Surrey for a little while, and then they moved me from East Surrey to QEF. When they got me out of bed, they had to put me straight into a wheelchair because I couldn't walk. I could no longer talk. My brain wouldn't operate properly, and I'd gone blind in my left eye, and I was going blind in my right eye, and my ribs were still broken and cutting into my lungs as I breathed. I think the first thing I really remember is being introduced to Holly, because Holly was my key worker, and she looked after me the whole time I was in there. And with Holly just explaining everything to me so nicely and making me feel, because I was obviously anxious, and making me feel relaxed and it was going to be okay in there. I had psychology therapy, I had physio at least 2 or 3 times a week, and the girls would sit down with me and play chess with me, and just to get my brain working. And every time they beat me. But it was so helpful, and the things they would do to get me to, because my brain had just gone and decided that I'd had enough. And just got me to just think properly again, because twice I'd considered suicide. But I got them horrible thoughts out of my head. Very successfully. So the physio girls, with all the different stuff and treatment and the stuff they did for me, actually got my legs working again so that I could walk. When I first started, I could walk about 20 paces and fall over. And by the time I come out of QEF, I was walking okay, fine again. Because at one time they thought I was going to go completely blind. And they got my eyesight back with all the treatment and the things I was having done at QEF. And so there I was, back able to talk, walk and see again. I can't see that had I not been at QEF, I think I would have just drifted into depression and given up. But I didn't. But yeah, they did everything they could to make sure that I was perfectly safe and ready to come home. With safety on stairs, walking about, able to cook properly, to fend for myself. And when I proved that I could, at QEF, that I could do all that stuff, the magic day came and Holly came into my room and said to me, Richard, you can go home, which was lovely. I couldn't find a bad word to say about any of the staff in QEF in all the months I was in there. I couldn't think of a single bad thing to say about a soul in that hospital. All the time I was in there, nothing but help and kindness, and that's a fact. And I mean it as well. If they do for other people what they've done for me, and constantly giving other people their lives back, which I know they're trying to do, to be in an even better facility, it can only help.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, and huge thanks to all of our speakers, and what an incredible video to finish on. Hugely emotional. I know we're all immensely proud to be able to help people like Richard. So now it's our opportunity for some questions and answers. We have had some pre-submitted questions, so I'll start with those if that's okay. Jen, if you could be so kind as to unmute all of our speakers, please. Thank you ever so much. So the first question is to Professor Wilson, and it's, how important is it to involve the family in someone's rehabilitation program?
Well, I think we have to work closely with the families and carers, that they know the patient best. We involve the families when we're negotiating goals. There are always families and families, so some families are really good at this, and some think it's all our responsibility and they shouldn't have to do anything. But I think they're in the minority. And we like, I'm sure you do too, we like families to come to the centre, to be involved in what's going on. We like to see children around, pets around. But, you know, if somebody has a brain injury, it's a family problem, it's not just the person. So, yeah, I think it's hugely important to work with the families. And we sometimes see families that actually we feel sabotage what we're doing. And that makes life very difficult. But most families are easy to work with and want to do the right thing. So we involve them as much as possible.
Brilliant, thank you. And next I have a question for Carol. How important is integrated care at the moment, having those therapy and specialist nursing services together?
Yeah, thank you. No, it's hugely important. I think it's, you know, we have the client as the centre of everything, you know, it all stems back to them. And therefore what their needs are, we need to all come together. So the nursing team, the therapy team, the admin team, the housekeeping team, everybody works together to actually make sure that they get the best experience with us, but also that we give them that feel that we can support them to move forward with their life. So whatever gains we're able to give them before they leave us and then hand them over to a community team, for example, then, you know, we're hoping that they can then take what they've learned with us and that feel to kind of move on and start living their lives again. So yeah, yeah, you can't put a price on it in a way that I think it makes a huge difference. Yeah.
Brilliant. Thank you, Carol. We have a question for Karen. What new treatment pathways do we think the new Care and Rehabilitation Centre might allow QEF to explore in the future?
That's part of my closing remark.
Oh, sorry.
Did you say, Karen?
I did, yes.
And that's part of my closing remark. I'm just checking I'm answering the right question, because the experts are sitting around me as well, so they'll be the ones helping decide that. But I think the group that we know that are going to need us more is that group of long COVID, is that group of clients that perhaps haven't been treated for the last year as well, people who haven't had access to treatment now are going to be rushed through. We need to try and enable that stay in acute trust very short, keep it very short, so we can help with the rehabilitation. So the other pathways that Carol mentioned in her speech, obviously we've got 5 different pathways we're considering now. Well, in fact, we've started 5 and there's more we're considering next year. And I know somebody put in the chat that they'd be particularly interested about that. We're very happy to keep people abreast of the things we're doing and the changes we make. But I think the building has enabled us to do so much more. So the staff and the team that I work with are just amazing. And they were restricted in a way by the building they were in. Now we have got the ability to tackle much greater complexities and different client groups. So I think as long as we can meet somebody's needs and we can make a difference, then we'll consider that pathway.
Brilliant. Thank you, Karen. I have another question for Carol. Have we seen a change in the number of strokes and seizures we've supported as a result of the pandemic?
We've had a couple of clients that have come in post-COVID. 1 or 2 of those have thought that was part of the actual process. So but it's difficult to say exactly, obviously. But yes, we had a particular gentleman who came to us and he'd been diagnosed with COVID. He was admitted he had a stroke following that. So and I know that COVID has been known to increase the viscosity of the blood, so the kind of stickiness of the blood, and therefore that's why we feel more strokes for that. We haven't had a huge number, which I'm pleased to say, but I know that actually stroke admission during the whole of the lockdown overall went down, and there was concern about why that might be. But yeah, it's something that we are aware of, and we may see more in the near future. So we are very keen to support anybody that comes through with any type of neurological deficit, but also the kind of long COVID, including people that suffer from fatigue, etc. That I know is that's the symptoms that they are showing. That it's been likened to perhaps like an ME, that type of issue. And certainly they're going to need support, I think, quite ongoing.
Thank you.
Thanks.
I have another question for Professor Wilson. What's been the biggest changes you've seen in neuropsychology over the last 5 years?
I think probably the biggest change has been that we do it more holistically now. When I first started out, we saw people for a memory problem or a physical problem or a communication problem. And now it's much more the person and seeing that how far these are interlinked. The cognitive, emotional, behavioural are so interlinked, it's very hard to separate them out. So I think that's probably the biggest change. There are obviously far more centres around now. When I started in the 70s, there were 2 centres. There was Rivermead, which had been a TB hospital at one point, and then there was the Camden one in London, and now there are, of course, many more, so that's another change. And on the bad side, when I started at Rivermead Rehabilitation Centre, we had 3 social workers, and I know some centres still have social workers, but we haven't seen a social worker in brain injury rehab for years now. They're all tied up with abused children or other things. So that's on the bad side. On the good side, it's the holistic approach and far more centres and far more general recognition, I think, from the public. Apart from the television, you see EastEnders and somebody has a severe head injury, unconscious for hours, wakes up, remembers everything. That makes me really cross because it just doesn't happen like that.
Same here.
Thank you. And Carol, did you want to add anything about how we've seen therapies change over the last 5 to 10 years?
I think I would agree. I think there's a lot more joint working, not only with the therapy team. I think we come together much more. There's a lot more joint sessions. There's a lot more feeling that actually, you know, we can't do it in silos. We need to do it all together. We need to bring the nurses in. We need to bring everybody that's working with the client. So families, their friends, their dog. We've had somebody desperate to see their dog, and during isolation, her husband has come along with his dog, with their dog, to sit outside, and that's really boosted her. So there's no kind of barrier to kind of anybody getting involved. That's important to that person. It comes back to the person that's had the injury and everybody around them that needs that support. And I think if we can come together as you know, a therapy team, nursing team, the care and support workers that are so important within this whole process, then I think we can have better outcomes, and we can give a much better service. And hopefully that, you know, the experience of somebody who has had obviously a catastrophic event, a shocking event, that you know, they were fine one day and in hospital the next. If we can make a difference to that, then, you know, all the better. That's what I do it for. Yeah.
Brilliant. Thank you. That's wonderful. We've had a question submitted from Philippa. Just asking if QEF can accept referrals from people who wander. She works with people who have strokes, and this particular person's also had a diagnosis of schizophrenia, but unfortunately she unintentionally absconds and doesn't realise she's not supposed to go out on her own. Is that someone that QEF would be able to support?
Do you want me to take this one? Sorry, so we have looked at that situation in the past. So we are not a locked-in service. So look, we're not a kind of secure service. However, we feel that we, as we're able to kind of adapt our service to the needs of the people out there, then we do have the option of using one of our upstairs wings and perhaps having a secure area within our building. So there's nobody that we wouldn't look at, but obviously we're really keen that if we take somebody in, that we can keep them safe and we're an appropriate place for them. So we're not saying no, never. Certainly at the moment, we're not set up for that, but would definitely look into that in the future.
And I think it's fair to say at the moment, if we did go right now, that would perhaps disable our other group more, and clearly we do look at the whole. But I think it's absolutely a pathway that we'll consider, particularly as we extend upstairs.
Brilliant. Thank you. I'm afraid we're almost out of time, so sadly that's it for questions now, but we'll do our best to come back to any others that are submitted on email with the follow-up. Thank you so much to all of our incredible speakers, and I'd just like to hand it back to our CEO, Karen, for the closing remarks. Thank you everyone for coming.
Thank you, Marissa, and thank you team for setting it up. I've seen some comments to say that people have found it really useful and interesting. I think the need for our services is only increasing, whether it be COVID, whether it be acquired brain injury from any other source. We can, and the lesson I've learned from this evening is, we maximise the great practice. We have high skills in our team. We now have a great environment. We know we can help people with the longer COVID, and we know therefore we can improve and work towards better outcomes. I'm so very proud to be part of the support that we give people with acquired brain injury, and I'm also proud of the amount of support we've had to build this amazing facility. It's been created by so many people giving so generously to us. We now have an amazing team in an amazing facility, producing amazing outcomes. I'm so grateful to everybody who worked so hard, particularly through the pandemic. We've never had a problem covering the staff. We've taken every client we possibly can directly from hospital as soon as we can. So I'm only like to finish with a thank you to the amazing team and what they do every single day to improve people's lives. Thank you for everybody who's given to us and everybody who gives to us in the future. And thank you from all the clients and the staff at QEF. Please keep safe and well. We hope you never need to use our services, but we will always be here for you if you do. Thank you. Good night.